An old pickup truck, its paint faded to the color of weak coffee, rattled down Main Street. Behind the wheel sat Harold, a man whose face was a road map of wrinkles etched by sun and time. He wore worn overalls and a cap pulled low, the picture of a man content with the quiet rhythm of farm life. He parked near the only bar in town, a place called the Rusty Spur, its neon sign buzzing a tired welcome. Harold was a creature of habit, and Tuesdays meant a single beer before heading home. He stepped inside, the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hitting him first. The usual low murmur of conversation filled the air. He nodded to Sal, the owner, a man whose forearms were as thick as fence posts, and took his usual stool at the far end of the bar. Sal slid a cold bottle across the counter. "Evening, Harold." "Quiet night." Harold grunted, a sound that passed for a greeting. He took a slow sip, his gaze sweeping the room with an almost imperceptible flick of his eyes. Most faces were familiar, weathered like his own, marked by years of hard work in the valley. But tonight, there were new faces. A group of younger men, maybe 5 of them, occupied a booth near the pool table. They were loud, their laughter sharp and grating, laced with an air of entitled swagger. They wore matching jackets, cheap leather with a crude symbol stitched on the back, a coiled snake. The serpent's coil. Harold knew the symbol. Knew the name. They were new to the area, muscle brought in by whatever operation was trying to sink its claws into this quiet corner of the world. He ignored them, focusing on his beer, the comforting weight of the bottle in his hand. Their noise was an intrusion, like a swarm of flies on a peaceful afternoon. One of the younger men, the loudest, with slicked back hair and a smirking face, caught Harold's eye. He nudged his companions, pointing a thumb towards Harold and grinning. Their eyes, hard and dismissive, followed his gesture. "Looky there," the leader sneered, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Grandpa time enjoying his sippy cup." His friend snickered. Another chimed in, "Probably needs help lifting that bottle, huh? Better call the nursing home." Harold didn't react, didn't even flinch. His gaze remained steady, but something shifted behind his eyes, a flicker of something cold and ancient. Sal, wiping down the counter, cast a nervous glance towards Harold, then back at the young men. The usual bar patrons grew quiet, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The leader, emboldened by Harold's apparent lack of response, stood up and sauntered towards the bar. He stopped a few feet away, looming over Harold. His friends watched, anticipation on their faces. "Hey, old man," the leader said, his voice dropping slightly but still loud enough for everyone to hear. "You hear us? Or you hard of hearing? Happens when you get closer to the grave, I hear." Harold finished his sip, set the bottle down deliberately, the clink echoing in the sudden silence. He turned slowly on his stool, his eyes meeting the young man's. There was no fear in them. Only a profound weariness, like looking at a problem he'd solved countless times before. "I heard you," Harold said, his voice quiet but clear, surprisingly deep. It held no tremor of age, only a quiet, unwavering strength. The leader laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Oh, you hear me? Good. Just making sure you know who's in charge around here now. Things are changing, Grandpa. You're kind. You're dinosaurs. Time to make way for the real world." He leaned closer, invading Harold's personal space. "Maybe you should stick to knitting and watching the Weather Channel. This is our town now." He reached out, his hand hovering over Harold's beer bottle as if he might knock it over. The shift was instantaneous. One moment, Harold was a quiet old farmer. The next, he was something else entirely. Without standing up, without any apparent effort, Harold's hand shot out. Not to strike, but to intercept. His fingers closed around the young man's wrist with impossible speed and strength. The leader's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of shock and pain. Harold didn't twist or break the wrist. He simply held it, his grip unyielding, conveying an immediate, undeniable message of superior power. The young man was frozen, his arm trapped, his face pale. "Son," Harold said, his voice still quiet, almost gentle, but the words landed with the force of hammer blows. "Respect isn't given. It's earned. And you haven't earned a damn thing." He held the grip for another agonizing second, letting the fear bloom in the young man's eyes, letting the entire bar witness the sudden, inexplicable reversal of dominance. Then, he released the wrist as abruptly as he'd taken it. The leader stumbled back, cradling his arm, his face a mask of confused rage and humiliation. His friends stared, their earlier bravado evaporating. Sal stood frozen behind the bar, a towel dangling from his hand. "You old," the leader sputtered, rage overcoming fear. "You'll regret that. You hear me? You hear the serpent's coil? You just made an enemy." Harold didn't answer, didn't even look at him. He turned back to his beer, picking up the bottle as if nothing had happened, taking another slow sip. The young man, realizing he was losing face in front of his crew and the bar, pointed a trembling finger at Harold. "This ain't over. You got lucky, old man. But you won't get lucky again." He backed away, bumping into a table. His friends, seeing their leaders retreat, followed, muttering threats under their breath. They paused at the door, shooting hate-filled glares back at Harold, before disappearing into the night. The bar remained silent for a long moment after they left. Everyone was looking at Harold, a mix of awe, confusion, and fear on their faces. A quiet farmer. Doing that? Harold ignored their stares. He finished his beer, placed the empty bottle on the counter, and nodded at Sal. "Good beer, Sal." "Harold." "What? What was that?" Sal finally managed, his voice a hushed whisper. Harold stood up, the joints in his knees making a soft clicking sound. He didn't look like a man who could move with such speed and precision. "Just teaching a boy some manners," he said simply. He dropped a couple of crumpled bills on the counter. "Keep the change." He walked towards the door, his gait slow and deliberate. Just before he stepped outside, a voice stopped him. "Harold." It was Sheriff Brody, who had been sitting quietly in a corner booth, a half-eaten plate of Sal's chili in front of him. Brody was a man who looked younger than his years, sharp-eyed and capable, but often underestimated by outsiders who saw only the dusty small-town badge. He had seen the whole thing. Harold paused, turning his head slightly. "Sheriff." Sheriff Brody stood up, wiping his mouth with a napkin. He walked over, stopping a respectful distance from Harold. The eyes behind the badge were knowing. "That," Brody said, his voice low, meant only for Harold, was a textbook wrist restraint. Clean, efficient, minimal damage. Didn't even stand up. He paused, a faint, unreadable expression on his face. "Haven't seen that kind of control outside of certain circles." Harold said nothing, his expression unreadable. Sheriff Brody lowered his voice further. "Those boys work for Ray, the Serpent, Jackson. Been moving in, pushing around folks, trying to get their hooks into things. Gas station, maybe some land." He looked around the quiet bar, then back at Harold. "Ray doesn't like being shown up. Especially not by someone he thinks is just an old farmer." Harold finally met Brody's gaze directly. The weariness was still there, but now, beneath it, was something else. Something hard and resolute. "They needed to know," Harold said softly, "that this town isn't as soft as they think." Sheriff Brody nodded slowly. He knew. He knew about Harold. Knew the whispers, the hushed legends from men who had served in different kinds of wars. Knew that the quiet farmer had once moved in circles few would ever understand. "They'll be back, Harold," Brody said, his voice serious. "Ray won't let this slide. Not after they got handled by." "Well, I know," Harold replied, his gaze steady. Let them come. He turned and walked out of the rusty spur, the night air cool on his face. The old pickup rattled to life, and he drove away, the quiet farmer heading back to his quiet life, a life that had just been irrevocably disrupted. Sheriff Brody watched the taillights disappear down the road. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had a feeling his job had just gotten a lot more complicated. Or maybe, just maybe, it had just gotten a whole lot easier, now that the town's quietest resident had decided to remind everyone, especially the newcomers, exactly what kind of ground they were treading on. Back at their car, the young men from the bar were a mix of anger and fear. The leader, whose name was Vic, kept flexing his wrist, grimacing. Did you see that? One of the others, a nervous kid named Mikey, stammered. He didn't even stand up. How'd he do that? Shut up, Mikey. Vic snapped. He got lucky. That's all. Just a lucky old man. Another, a heavier man named Brick, frowned. Didn't look like luck, Vic looked like something else. Looked like disrespect. Vic snarled, punching the dashboard. Nobody does that to me. Nobody makes me look like a fool in front of everyone. Ray's gonna hear about this. He pulled out his phone, his fingers clumsy with rage. He dialed a number he knew well. Boss? Yeah, it's Vic. We got a situation. That gas station owner. No, not him yet. It was some old farmer. At the bar. Yeah. He resisted. Made a scene. Put his hands on me. He listened for a moment, his face growing paler. Yes, boss. I understand. Find out who he is. Make an example. No problem. Consider it handled. Vic hung up, his bravado returning, mixed with a cold fear born of his boss's chilling instructions. Ray wants his name, he announced, looking at his crew. And he wants this dealt with. Permanently. Nobody messes with the coil. He started the car, peeling away from the bar, the coiled snake symbol on their jackets catching the faint light. They were heading back to report to Ray Jackson, their minds already plotting how to retaliate against the quiet farmer who had dared to defy them. They had no idea the storm they were about to unleash. Harold pulled his truck into his farmyard. The old farmhouse was dark, quiet. He walked inside, the familiar scent of wood smoke and old paper comforting him. He went straight to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and stood by the sink, looking out at the dark fields under the stars. Past. It wasn't supposed to come back. Not here. Not ever again. He walked down a short hallway to a small, unassuming door. He opened it and descended into a root cellar, damp and cool. But this wasn't just a root cellar. Tucked away behind shelves of canned preserves was another door, reinforced steel, hidden behind cleverly placed boards. He opened it, the mechanism clicking softly. Inside was a small, climate-controlled room. Not a bunker, not a weapons cache. Not exactly. It was more a museum. A collection of carefully maintained equipment. A worn leather satchel containing old maps and notebooks. A set of tools that looked out of place in a farm cellar. And on a workbench, meticulously clean, lay a few items. He picked up a faded photograph. A group of young men and women, grim-faced but resolute, standing in front of a military transport. He was in it, younger, sharper, his eyes holding the same quiet intensity. The team. Echo Platoon. Legends whispered in hushed tones in certain corners of the world. Special Operations. His specialty hadn't been kicking down doors. It had been problem-solving. The kind of problems governments preferred not to officially acknowledge. Extraction. Infiltration. Setting things right with minimal footprint, maximum efficiency. He set the photo down. He ran a hand over a section of a dismantled tactical knife, the steel cool and familiar under his touch. These skills, this life, he had buried them deeper than any root cellar. He had found peace here, among the fields and the quiet rhythms of the earth. But peace, he knew, was a fragile thing. It had to be defended. He looked at the items in the room, the ghosts of a past life. It seemed the farm might need a different kind of harvest this year. The next morning, Sheriff Brody was waiting for Harold by his pickup at the feed store. Harold was loading sacks of chicken feed, his movements easy despite the weight. "Harold," Brody said, his voice low. Harold paused, resting a sack on the tailgate. "Sheriff." "They ID'd you," Brody said. "Vic and his boys." Asked around. "Ray Jackson knows your name now." "Harold Miller. Lives out on the old Miller farm." Harold finished loading the sack. "Figured he would. He's not happy. Called you a stubborn old fool who needs to be removed." Brody paused, searching Harold's face. "He's bad news, Harold. Deals and more than just shaking down local businesses. There are rumors. People disappear. Money laundering, maybe worse." Harold closed the tailgate. "Bad seeds spoil the crop, Sheriff. He runs this town, Harold. Or thinks he does. Has people scared. Has the mayor in his pocket, probably some of the council. My hands are tied up to a point." Brody looked frustrated. "Any move I make overtly, it gets leaked. He's insulated." "Insulation can be stripped away," Harold said, his gaze distant. "Harold, I know what they say about you," Brody said, stepping closer, lowering his voice even further. "The stories. From back in the day. I served a couple of tours myself. Heard things. Whispers about a guy. Quiet, unassuming. But could move like a ghost and hit like lightning. They called him the gardener. Because he always cleaned up the messy situations." Harold's eyes met Brody's, a faint, almost imperceptible acknowledgement passing between them. The gardener. A name from a different life. "Those are just stories, Sheriff," Harold said, his voice flat. "Maybe," Brody conceded. "But last night didn't look like just stories. Looked like skills. Skills that could be useful right now. This town is dying, Harold. Ray Jackson is a cancer." Harold turned, leaning against his truck. "What are you asking, Sheriff?" "I'm asking for help," Brody said directly. "Unofficial help. I can't come at him head-on yet. Not legally. But I can look the other way sometimes. I can provide information. Keep official eyes off certain things. But someone needs to hit him where it hurts. Disrupt his operation. Make him vulnerable. Make him make mistakes that even my corrupt superiors can't cover up." Harold looked out at the fields again, the rising sun painting them gold. The peace he'd cultivated for so long felt threatened, tainted. He had a choice. Retreat, hope Jackson lost interest, unlikely, or stand his ground. Standing his ground had never just meant on his own property. It meant protecting the ground he stood on. The community. Ray Jackson, Harold said slowly, relies on fear. On people being weak. On thinking they have no choice. "Exactly," Brody said, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "He needs to learn he's not dealing with weak people anymore. He needs to learn," Harold finished, his voice hardening, "that some old roots run deeper than he knows. And they don't break easily." He pushed off the truck. "All right, Sheriff. I'll help you prune this problem. Where do we start?" "Intel," Brody said, relieved but also apprehensive. "He's got a place outside town, old abandoned mill. Used to be for lumber. Now. Rumors say it's his main hub. Meetings, storing whatever he's moving. Maybe where they keep people. An old mill, Harold mused. Lots of places to hide. Lots of places to listen. Careful, Harold, Brody warned. This isn't like handling some punks at a bar. Ray Jackson is dangerous. He has serious people working for him. So do I, Sheriff, Harold said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. Or, I used to. Might be time to call in a few favors. He knew just the men. Men who understood duty, loyalty, and the precise application of force when necessary. Men who, like him, had tried to find peace but would answer the call when injustice reared its ugly head. The old Echo platoon. Scattered across the country now, living quiet lives. A mechanic in Arizona, a fishing guide in Maine, a history teacher in Ohio. But they were a family. A signal, a simple code phrase in a message, and they would come running. For Harold. For what was right. Tell us where you're watching from. Let us know which state or country you're tuning in from in the comments below. It's always inspiring to see how far these stories travel. Harold spent the next few days working his farm, the familiar routines a balm to his soul, a reminder of what he was fighting for. But his mind was busy, planning. He drove the old pickup, not just to the feed store, but along the back roads, observing. The old mill. Run down, neglected, surrounded by thick woods. A single dirt track leading in and out. Perfect for discreet operations. And perfect for observation. He scouted the perimeter on foot, moving with a silence that belied his age. Years of training, of moving through hostile territory, came flooding back. The woods felt familiar, like an old friend. He noted entry points, weak spots, sight lines. He saw the patrols, young men, armed, looking bored and overconfident. Just like Vic and his crew. Jackson relied on numbers and intimidation, not skill. That was his first mistake. Sheriff Brody met him again, this time in a quiet diner on the edge of town. Brody slid a folder across the table. Intel on Jackson, Brody said softly. Real name, background checks I could dig up without raising flags. Associates. Known hangouts. And the mill. Layouts I found in the town archives. Old blueprints. Harold opened the folder. Ray Jackson. Former mid-level enforcer in a city gang, came out west to carve out his own territory. Vicious, paranoid, trusted few people completely. His main lieutenants were the muscle, guys like Vic, Brick, and a particularly nasty piece of work named Silas, rumored to handle Jackson's disposal problems. The blueprints of the mill showed multiple floors, a basement, connecting tunnels used for transporting timber. A complex layout. He uses the basement, Brody said, tapping the blueprint. Soundproofed. And the top floor. Good vantage point. Security? Harold asked, his eyes scanning the plan. Mix, Brody replied. Cameras on the road in, maybe a few around the building. Patrols. Dogs sometimes. Nothing sophisticated. They rely on the location being isolated and people being too scared to look. Harold nodded. Fear was a powerful weapon, but it had limits. And he knew how to exploit those limits. He showed Brody the text messages he'd sent. Encrypted, untraceable, using a network they'd established decades ago. Simple, innocuous phrases that only they understood. The crops are failing. Need help with the harvest. Harvest? Brody asked, confused. Our code, Harold explained. Means there's a problem. A big one. Need the team. Brody stared at the messages. And they'll just come. They will, Harold said with certainty. They understand. We look after our own. And this town. It feels like our own now. While Harold planned and waited, the serpent's coil wasn't idle. Vic and his crew, smarting from the humiliation at the bar, were under pressure from Jackson to find and deal with the old farmer. They couldn't find Harold on his farm, he was deliberately keeping a low profile there, so they decided to make a statement. A public example to show the town that the serpent's coil couldn't be challenged. They targeted Sal at the Rusty Spur. It happened 2 nights later. Sal was closing up, locking the front door, when a car screeched to a halt. 4 men piled out, Vic among them, baseball bats in hand. "Closing early, Sal?" Vic sneered. "Or are you just scared?" Sal, a big man but unused to violence, stood his ground. "Get lost, Vic. I ain't got trouble with you." "You got trouble now," Brick said, stepping forward. "Your friend, the old man. He made us look bad. And anyone who protects him. They got problems." They didn't give Sal a chance to answer. They descended on him, beating him savagely. They smashed the bar windows, overturned tables, sprayed graffiti with the coiled snake symbol on the walls. It was a message. Raw, brutal, undeniable. Sheriff Brody arrived shortly after, finding Sal bleeding on the sidewalk, the bar a wreck. The message was clear: challenge the serpent's coil, and suffer the consequences. Fear tightened its grip on the town. Harold heard about it the next morning. He drove into town, his face grim. He saw the shattered windows, the crude symbol. He visited Sal in the small town clinic. Sal was bruised and bandaged but alive. "They wanted to know where you were, Harold," Sal rasped, his voice weak. "I didn't tell them nothin'." "You did good, Sal," Harold said, placing a hand on his arm. "You did real good." The attack on Sal was the line. The line the serpent's coil shouldn't have crossed. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the town, about innocent people caught in the middle. That evening, his team started arriving. One by one, unobtrusively. Ben, the mechanic from Arizona. Quiet, powerfully built, uncanny with anything mechanical or electronic. Sarah, the history teacher from Ohio. Sharp as a tack, master of infiltration and logistics. And Marcus, the fishing guide from Maine. Former demolitions expert, calm under pressure, deadly accurate. They met at Harold's farm, in the hidden room beneath the root cellar. They didn't look like a crack team of former special operators. Ben had grease under his fingernails, Sarah wore sensible librarian glasses, and Marcus smelled faintly of fish. But in their eyes, Harold saw the familiar spark. The readiness. The unwavering loyalty. They sat around a worn table, blueprints spread out, alongside maps of the town and surrounding area. Sheriff Brody was there too, a little out of place but trusted. "Status report," Harold said, the authority in his voice immediate and absolute. The quiet farmer was gone. This was the gardener speaking. Ben detailed Jackson's vehicle movements he'd observed. Sarah presented intelligence gathered from seemingly innocent conversations in town: who was scared, who might be on Jackson's payroll, who could be trusted. Marcus laid out potential routes to and from the mill, identifying blind spots in surveillance. Sheriff Brody provided the official angle: the lack of evidence for arrests, the roadblocks from corrupt officials, the growing fear in the community. "They hit Sal's bar," Harold said, his voice cold. "Made a statement. Tried to re-establish control through fear." "Standard tactic," Sarah murmured. "Punish dissent, terrorize the population. Undermines local authority." "Exactly," Harold said. "So we undermine him. Ray Jackson relies on his operation running smoothly, on his lieutenants being effective, on the town being too afraid to fight back. We hit all 3-inch. He pointed to the mill blueprint. This is his hub. We can't just storm it. Too many unknowns, too many potential hostages, too much risk of him slipping away. We need to draw him out. Or, better yet, make him feel safe enough that he comes here. Here? Brody asked, startled. To the farm? He knows where I live now, Harold said calmly. He sees me as the source of his problems. If we hit his operations, hard and fast, he'll want to confront the source directly. He'll bring his best people on our ground. But that puts you and your team at risk, Harold, Brody said, concerned. This whole town is at risk, Sheriff, Marcus said, his quiet voice firm. And Harold's farm is defensible. We control the terrain. We set the terms. Harold outlined the plan. A series of targeted disruptions to Jackson's operation. Not direct attacks, but precision strikes designed to cause chaos, cost him money, and erode his confidence. Ben would disable key vehicles or communication arrays. Sarah would infiltrate and extract incriminating evidence or sow confusion. Marcus would persuade key pieces of infrastructure to cease functioning, temporarily and strategically. All of it designed to point back, subtly, to the old farmer who stood up at the bar. We make him angry, Harold summarized. We make him paranoid. We make him feel like his power is slipping away. And then we wait. The team agreed. There was no hesitation. This was what they did. This was why they existed. Protecting the innocent, righting wrongs, ensuring justice, even if it had to be delivered outside the system. Over the next week, the Serpent's Coil started experiencing problems. Big problems. First, 2 of Jackson's cars, modified muscle cars he used for intimidation, were found completely inoperable. Not smashed, just dead. Engines seized, electronics fried. Ben's handiwork. Then, delivery Jackson was expecting went missing. A truckload of something illegal. It simply vanished somewhere along a deserted rural road. Later, the truck was found, empty, miles away, wiped clean. Sarah's work, using misdirection and timing gleaned from intercepted, and perfectly legal, traffic camera feeds Brody shared. Next, a key meeting place used by Jackson's lieutenants, a back room in a seemingly legitimate auto shop, was rendered unusable. Not through violence, but structural instability. Marcus had a way with explosives, not just for demolition, but for precise, calculated disruption. A load-bearing wall subtly compromised, forcing the shop to close for renovations. Jackson was furious. His operations were faltering, his lieutenants were jumpy, and he had no concrete leads. Who was doing this? It had to be related to the old farmer. The timing was too coincidental. But how was one old man causing so much trouble? He sent Vic and Brick back to the bar, demanding answers, threatening Sal again. But this time, Sal was ready. And so were a few other townsfolk, quietly emboldened by the knowledge that someone, the someone, was fighting back. When Vic and Brick started their threats, they were met not with cowering, but with quiet stares and stubborn silence. Sal, though still recovering, stood a little taller. The fear hadn't vanished, but a sliver of defiance had appeared. Jackson escalated. He ordered more direct action. Find the farmer. Bring him in. Or make him disappear. He brought in Silas, his most brutal enforcer, to oversee the operation. Silas didn't ask questions or plan elaborate strategies. He used force. And fear. They started leaning harder on the town. Vandalizing businesses that didn't pay protection money. Roughing up people who spoke out. The sense of an impending storm grew palpable. Sheriff Brody found his resources stretched thin, dealing with the increased street crime, trying to document everything without tipping his hand to his corrupt superiors. If you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel and like the video. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you want to support our work, please consider liking and subscribing. Thank you for your support. Harold and his team saw the escalation coming. They knew Jackson was being pushed, becoming desperate and reckless. This was the phase where he'd make his move against the source. Against Harold. They began fortifying the farm. Not turning it into a fortress, but enhancing its natural defenses, setting up overlapping fields of fire, establishing communication points, preparing fallback positions. It was subtle work, done under the cover of normal farm maintenance. Fences reinforced, sheds reorganized, fields cleared in strategic ways. Sheriff Brody provided information on Jackson's movements, the types of vehicles his men used, their likely numbers. He couldn't participate directly in the farm's defense, but he could be ready to act once the inevitable confrontation happened, ensuring that once Jackson's forces were engaged and isolated, the legal system could finally move in. The night Jackson made his move was dark, moonless. A few scattered clouds obscured the stars. Perfect for infiltration. Or for an ambush. Harold was in the farmhouse kitchen, a mug of lukewarm coffee in his hands. Sarah was monitoring sensors, Ben was in the barn checking equipment, Marcus was positioned overlooking the main approach. Brody was on standby in town, pretending to be at the station, ready to mobilize the few deputies he trusted the moment Harold gave the signal. The signal came quietly. Movement, Sarah's voice was calm, coming over their secure comms. 3 vehicles. Approaching from the main road. Turning onto the farm track now. Harold checked his watch. Just after midnight. Right on time. Numbers? Harold asked. Looks like a dozen men, Sarah replied. Maybe more. Silas is in the lead vehicle. Jackson's not with them. He's waiting somewhere nearby. Probably the mill. He'll only come if Silas reports success. All right, Harold said, his voice steady. Phase 1. Let them come onto the property. Ben, kill the power to the perimeter when they're halfway up the track. Marcus, lights out on the house when the power drops. Sarah, audio and thermal only. Copy, came the replies. The hum of approaching engines grew louder. Headlights cut twin paths through the darkness. They slowed as they reached the farmhouse clearing, spreading out. Men began disembarking. Armed. Moving with a confidence that bordered on carelessness. They expected an old man, maybe a few friends. Not a reception committee. Then, the world went dark. The headlights flickered and died. The house lights vanished. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the night sky and the small tactical lights the men carried. What the hell? Silas's voice was a harsh whisper, caught by Sarah's sensitive microphones. Power's out, boss, someone yelled nervously. Find the box. Silas ordered. Fan out. Miller's gotta be here somewhere. They spread out, moving towards the house and the barns, stumbling slightly in the sudden dark. They were outlined against the faint light. Harold and his team were already ghosts in the shadows. This was Harold's element. The night. The shadows. The calculated chaos. Years of training, dormant for so long, surged through him. His senses were heightened, his body moving with an efficiency that felt both familiar and alien after years of manual labor. The first contact was swift and silent. Ben, positioned near where the power lines entered the property, took down the 2 men sent to check the breaker box. Quick, clean takedowns, leaving them unconscious but unharmed, their weapons secured. Marcus handled the group approaching the barn. Not with gunfire, not yet. With precision-placed flashbangs and sonic emitters that disoriented and incapacitated without causing permanent harm. Screams of surprise and pain echoed briefly in the night, cut short by Marcus and Harold moving in to neutralize them. Sarah, unseen, moved around the perimeter, disabling the vehicles left on the track, ensuring there would be no quick escape. Silas, realizing the situation was rapidly deteriorating, bellowed orders. "They're out here. Find them. Open fire." Gunfire erupted, wild and undirected, tearing into the side of the farmhouse and the barns. But Harold and his team weren't there. They were moving through the darkness, using the farm's layout, the fences, the outbuildings, the drainage ditches, as cover and concealment. Harold engaged a group trying to breach the back door of the house. Hand to hand, brutal and efficient. He moved with a speed and agility that seemed impossible for a man his age. Every movement was economical, designed to end the fight immediately. A strike to a nerve cluster, a joint manipulation, a swift, disabling blow. These men were trained for street fights, for intimidating civilians. They were not trained for this. Not for the gardener. Within minutes, the initial assault force was neutralized. 12 men, taken down silently or quickly overwhelmed in the dark. Zip ties secured wrists, makeshift gags silenced mouths. They were dragged into sheds, out of sight. Harold contacted Brody. "Sheriff. The harvest is contained. About a dozen packages. Ready for pickup." Brody's voice was tight with relief and surprise. "A dozen? That fast? Harold, are you and your team all right?" "Minor bumps and bruises," Harold replied. "Nothing we can't handle. Ray Jackson isn't here. He's waiting for Silas to report." "Right," Brody said, collecting himself. "Okay. We're mobilizing now. We'll secure the prisoners. What's your next move?" "Jackson won't wait long," Harold said. "When Silas doesn't report, he'll know something's wrong. He'll either cut his losses and run, or he'll come here himself." "My bet? He's too arrogant to run. He'll come to finish it. And he'll bring whatever's left." "You're going to face him here?" Brody asked. "He wants me," Harold said. "He gets me. On my terms." He paused. "But I need you to be ready, Sheriff. When he shows, I'll signal. That's when you move on the mill. Hit him from both sides. Take away his base of operations while we handle him." "Understood," Brody said. "Be careful, Harold." "Always am, Sheriff." Harold and his team prepared for the second wave. This one would be harder. Jackson wouldn't send his C-team this time. He'd bring his personal guard, men likely as ruthless as Silas, maybe more skilled. And this time, they'd know they were walking into a fight. Dawn was approaching, painting the sky in shades of gray and purple, when the second group arrived. Fewer vehicles this time, but heavier, faster. And they didn't drive up to the house. They stopped at the edge of the property, deploying men under the cover of the tree line. Jackson was with them. Harold could sense his presence. Jackson's voice boomed out from a bullhorn, distorted and menacing. "Harold Miller. You hear me? You think you can make a fool of me? You think you can mess with the serpent's coil and get away with it?" Harold remained silent, hidden. "I know you're out there, old man," Jackson yelled. "You and whatever little help you got. You took down Silas and his men. That was stupid, Miller. Real stupid. Now you're gonna pay. I'm gonna burn this farm to the ground. I'm gonna find every single person who helped you, and I'm gonna make you watch while I hurt them." His words were meant to instill fear, to provoke. But they only solidified Harold's resolve. He wasn't just fighting thugs anymore. He was fighting a predator. Jackson continued. "Come out, Miller. Face me. Or I'll send my men in. And they won't be gentle. We'll find you eventually. Hiding won't help you." Harold activated a small microphone near the farmhouse. His voice, amplified just enough to carry clearly, cut through Jackson's rant. "Jackson!" Harold called out. Calm. Centered. "You came to my home. Uninvited." Jackson paused, surprised Harold was answering. "That's right, old man. You're home. And it's about to be your grave. You threaten my home," Harold continued, ignoring the threat, his voice gaining a quiet power. "You threaten my friends. You poison this town. I own this town." Jackson roared. "You own nothing," Harold stated, the words echoing slightly. "You take. You destroy. You don't build. You don't earn respect. Enough talk." Jackson yelled, his patience wearing thin. "My men are coming in. This is your last chance, Miller. Surrender now." "Your men," Harold said, a hint of something cold in his tone, "tried that already. Didn't end well for them." Jackson hesitated for a fraction of a second. How did the old man know? Was he watching? Where? "Get him!" Jackson shrieked, losing control. "Find him. Kill him." His remaining force, perhaps 10 or 12 men, surged forward from the tree line, spreading out, firing wildly. They advanced towards the farmhouse and outbuildings. This was the trap. Harold, Sarah, Ben, and Marcus opened fire, not with overwhelming force, but with precise, targeted bursts. They didn't aim to kill, but to incapacitate: knees, shoulders, weapons, hands. Each shot was deliberate, effective. They used the cover they'd prepared, disappearing and reappearing like phantoms. The attacking force was caught in a crossfire they couldn't comprehend. Men went down, crying out in pain and surprise. They couldn't locate their attackers. It was like fighting ghosts in the dawn light. Jackson, watching from the tree line, was in disbelief. His best men, elite enforcers he paid handsomely, were being systematically dismantled by an old farmer and his friends? It was impossible. It was infuriating. "Fall back!" Jackson screamed into his radio. "Fall back! To the mill! Everyone back to the mill!" This was the moment Harold was waiting for. The signal. "Sheriff!" Harold said into his comms. "They're falling back. Heading for the mill. Jackson's with them. Now." "On it, Harold." Brody replied, his voice tight with anticipation. He and his trusted deputies had been staged, waiting. Now they moved. Jackson and his remaining men, panicking, scrambled back to their vehicles. They piled in and sped away from the farm, heading for the perceived safety of the mill, their base of operations. They were leaving behind injured men, broken weapons, and shattered confidence. They didn't know they were driving straight into another trap. As Jackson's convoy sped towards the mill, they found the main road blocked. Not by a police barricade, that would have tipped off Jackson's corrupt contacts, but by a seemingly broken-down logging truck, strategically parked across both lanes. And behind it, Sheriff Brody and his deputies, weapons drawn, augmented by a few unexpected faces: Sal, bruised but resolute, holding a baseball bat, and several other townsfolk, armed with shotguns and hunting rifles. They weren't professional soldiers, but they were angry citizens protecting their home. Jackson's vehicle screeched to a halt. Men piled out, realizing they were cornered. Before they could react, Brody stepped forward, bullhorn in hand. "Ray Jackson. And the Serpent's Coil. You are surrounded. Put your weapons down and surrender. It's over." Jackson stared in disbelief. The sheriff? And the townspeople? How? How had this old farmer rallied the entire town against him? "Brody, you fool!" Jackson screamed. "You think you can stop me? My contacts will have your badge. I'll have you killed." Your contacts just got a very large package of your men, zip-tied and waiting for interrogation, Brody said calmly. And thanks to some anonymous tips, we have warrants for your arrest. Federal warrants, Jackson. You're done. Jackson snarled, raising his weapon. Never. Silas. Kill them. But Silas wasn't there. And the remaining men were demoralized, facing not just law enforcement, but the people they had terrorized, finally fighting back. A few tried to raise their weapons, but they were immediately met with a controlled volley of fire from Brody and the townspeople, aimed to disable, not kill. Seeing the futility, seeing his men drop around him, seeing the cold, determined faces of the people he had underestimated, Ray Jackson's arrogance finally broke. He threw down his weapon and raised his hands. The remaining Serpent's Coil members followed suit. The fight was over. Back at the farm, Harold and his team were securing the prisoners left behind. Ben was checking on the injured Serpent's Coil members, applying basic first aid until the ambulances arrived. Sarah was collecting the discarded weapons and evidence. Marcus was ensuring the perimeter was clear. Sheriff Brody arrived later, after the last of Jackson's men had been cuffed and taken away by a contingent of state police and federal agents Brody had called in. He shook Harold's hand, a look of profound respect on his face. "You did it, Harold," Brody said, his voice full of emotion. "You broke them. You broke the Serpent's Coil. You saved this town." Harold nodded, accepting the thanks quietly. His team stood nearby, watching him, the silent acknowledgement of a mission accomplished passing between them. "It wasn't just me, Sheriff," Harold said. "It was the team. And it was the town. People willing to stand up. That's what matters." Brody looked towards the group of townsfolk who had helped with the blockade, now gathering nearby, some still armed, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "Yeah," he said, a smile finally touching his lips. "It turns out this town wasn't so soft after all." Weeks turned into months. The Serpent's Coil was dismantled. Ray Jackson and his lieutenants faced federal charges, their reign of fear ending in a courtroom, not a back alley. The corrupt officials who had aided them were exposed and removed. The town began to heal. The windows at the Rusty Spur were replaced, the graffiti painted over. Sal reopened, his bar more popular than ever, a symbol of resistance and community. The fear that had gripped the town for so long dissipated, replaced by a quiet strength, a newfound unity. Harold's farm returned to its quiet rhythm. The land was tilled, the crops planted, the cycle of life continuing. His team stayed for a while, helping with repairs, sharing quiet meals, reminiscing about a past life and acknowledging the good they had done in this one. Then, one by one, they left, returning to their civilian lives, ready to answer the call again if ever needed. Sheriff Brody became the town's hero, hailed for breaking the hold of organized crime. He never spoke publicly about Harold's direct involvement, just about the crucial, anonymous tips and the courageous citizens who had helped. He and Harold maintained a quiet understanding, a bond forged in shared purpose and a hidden history. One afternoon, Harold was sitting on his porch swing, watching the sun set over his fields. Sheriff Brody pulled up in his cruiser, got out, and walked over, settling into the swing beside him. "Quiet evening," Brody observed. "Peaceful," Harold agreed. "You know," Brody said, looking out at the fields. "Jackson never understood. He saw strength as taking, as dominating. He thought he could push people around just because he was louder, more violent. He confused fear with respect," Harold said softly. "They aren't the same." "No," Brody agreed. "Respect is earned. You showed them how. You showed everyone." He paused. "The town. It's different now, Harold. Better. People aren't scared anymore. They talk, they help each other. You woke something up." Harold looked out at the horizon, a faint smile on his face. Some seeds take time to sprout, Sheriff. They just needed the right conditions. He had come here for peace, and for a time, he had found it. Then, the past had knocked, wearing the face of arrogance and cruelty. He hadn't wanted to answer, but duty, that ingrained sense of justice, had compelled him. He had dug up the old skills, rallied the old friends, and reminded the world that even the quietest among us might carry the strength of titans. He had defended his home, his community, and in doing so, had finally made peace with the man he used to be, integrating the quiet farmer and the deadly gardener into one complete whole. The scars remained, the memories were still there, but the burden felt lighter. He settled back in the swing, the gentle creak the only sound in the twilight. The crops were healthy. The town was safe. The harvest, this year, had been one of courage and justice. Up next you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.